Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Clallam EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen this morning. We're extremely excited and proud to have our Congressman, Derek Kilmer, on with us today. We are just so blessed that he has been representing our area, our county, our district for so many years. And as everyone knows, he has decided to retire from Congress. And this is essentially our opportunity to say thank you and tell him how much he'll be missed. So a few housekeeping items quickly. If you're not on mute, please put yourself on mute. We don't want to pick up any background noise. Puppies or kids or the like, or whatever it might be, phone calls. So if you'll do that for us, we'd really appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of folks would like to chime in and just say a few words to Derek. So we'll do that by your virtual hand raising, and or if you just want me to say something over Zoom, you can put it in the chat. So with that, Representative Kilmer, thank you for being here. You are beloved, and take it away.
Thanks a bunch, Colleen, and it's great to see everybody. It's always fun for me to visit with folks in Clallam County because, I feel like I have grown up with many of you. I see Betsy Robbins' face on my screen, who I met as a kid. I see Jim Hagwood, who I reached out to after college trying to find a job. He did not hire me, by the way, but I tried. I see Calvin Going's name on my screen, who, when I worked for the Clallam EDC's sister organization in Pierce County, I got to know very well when he was on the county council there, and so many others that I've gotten to consider partners and friends. Mike Maxwell and others who've just been terrific partners. So thanks for being on and spending a little bit of your morning with me. And also thanks for being involved with the EDC. I was always, when I worked in economic development, it always made me grumpy when elected officials didn't say thank you to employers and for the folks who were doing the hard work on the ground in our community. And so um, if you don't hear anything else from me today, I just hope you hear gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for being involved with the EDC. Thank you to Colleen and Lori and the team for the extraordinary work you all do. There's a bunch we could talk about. I could give you an update on what's happening in our nation's capital. Somewhat reticent to do that since many of you probably just had breakfast. I could, give you a bit of a prognosis on the year ahead, which I'm happy to talk about during Q&A. But the main thing I wanted to share with you is gratitude. My time here in our nation's capital, my representation of our community was entirely formed by growing up in PA. As many of you know, I was in high school right around the time the timber industry was taking it on the chin. And, when I went off to college, my senior thesis was how do you help timber towns in Washington State? And then did the same thing in graduate school. Spent a few years working as a business consultant, and then, wanted to work in economic development. And, it was because I grew up in Port Angeles. That was my why for getting into politics. I never thought I'd run for office. I just was a grumpy economic developer who kept finding myself saying, gosh, what government does and doesn't do sure impacts our ability to grow jobs. And finally, some of my friends said, you seem like you have a lot of good ideas and you sure complain a lot. Why don't you go do something about it, pal? And the next thing I knew, I was serving in the state legislature. So that is a short version of saying, be careful what you complain about, because you can end up, you can end up like me, God forbid. But one of the things that I have appreciated about our community has just been the capacity to pull together. The easy thing to do when there's challenging times, and you see it in Congress a lot, is, everybody has their own agenda. I always say in Congress, it's hard enough when the seas are really rocky to get where you need to go. It's really hard when like 90% of the oars are rowing one way and 45% of the oars are rowing one way, 45% of the oars are rolling the other way, and 10% of the oars are out of the water, just beating everybody else over the heads, which is what you see in Congress far too often. And I think, one of the things I've appreciated as, a guy from Clallam County is just the ethic that we have of just trying to get stuff done. Even when we see a challenge, we just plow ahead. And you've seen that in some of the stuff we've been able to do together. I cannot thank and applaud Colleen and the EDC team enough for their involvement with the recompete effort. That was a bill that came out of some of the academic work I had done, which said, we need to have flexible, multi-year support with some capacity building on the front end. We're not Seattle, right? We don't have a team of we don't have an army of grant writers and folks to navigate the federal system of grants and loans. And, so having an approach that's a little bit more simple, that is flexible, was really important. And so we set up that program. It was included as a pilot program in the CHIPS and Science Act. In its first year, it became the most popular program in the history of the Economic Development Administration. There were 565 applications from 49 states. Apparently, everything's fine in South Dakota because no one from South Dakota applied, but every other state had an application. And of those 565, six got big implementation grants, and one was our community. And that is, to me, a testament to, you had, couple different counties, you had multiple tribes, you had ports, you had economic development organizations and chambers and local business leaders and cities and counties, and everybody just pulled together. And I think that is such a testament to our community. We've seen that on other projects too. The Port of Port Angeles has been able to secure grants from the federal government in a way that it has not historically, and that is a testament to the leadership of the port and of our local community. You've seen federal support come in for the city, for the tribes, and it means we've been able to do good stuff. And in each of those instances, it hasn't been the local entity that it's applying on its own. I think about, during the pandemic, when we were able to get $900,000 for the food bank in Port Angeles, the application they put in included support letters from half the town. I mean, it was extraordinary. And I say that because I think sometimes, and I say this as someone who grew up in Port Angeles, sometimes when you live there, you just forget how special of a place it is. And I hope you remember how special of a place it is, because it really is extraordinary, just how much progress that we're able to make when we do things together. So my big why when I got to Congress was, we set up the mission, my office, and the mission was create more economic opportunity for more people in more places. And that's looked different in PA than it's looked in other part of our district. One of the first things we did was work with the timber industry and with the conservation community to set up the Olympic Forest Collaborative, to get folks actually thinking together and talking together about how we manage our forests in a way that makes more sense, both from a forest health standpoint and from an economic standpoint. We still have work to do on that front. That has been a persistent battle for me, and something that we've been really pushing the Forest Service hard on. That's going to need to be a continued push for our community. But we were able to launch some important pilot projects to increase harvest levels and to supplement the work of the Forest Service. We've been able to do some other stuff too, but I want to mention one other thing, and then I probably talk longer than you wanted me to, Colleen, and I'm happy to take some questions. I mentioned the main focus that I've had is just trying to work together to get things done economically. The other big push that I have had is just trying to make Congress work better for folks and make government work better for folks. And again, I want to thank our local community for your partnership in that regard. There was not a week that went by where we wouldn't have someone reach out to our office and say, hey, my business is having an issue with the IRS. We haven't gotten our our tax return. And I wouldn't have known to call you except for Colleen suggested that we call your office. Or, I do business selling to the Defense Department. There's a business out in Squim that, does explosive welding work. Um, Early in my tenure, they said, hey, we were told by the EDC to reach out to you. And, we were able to work with them and, really open some opportunity. And so I share that with you because a lot of the problems that our office was able to solve in terms of trying to make government work better really is a testament to the folks in the community who made those connections for us. And um, some of the work that I've tried to do is working to try to make Congress work better. I was asked back in 2019 to lead a committee focused on making Congress work better. My first reaction when I was asked by the speaker to lead that committee was, Madam Speaker, what have I done to offend you? Because the history of those efforts has been pretty dismal. But we actually did some things really different. I'm happy to talk about that too if folks are interested. Um, and as a consequence, we passed over 200 recommendations to make Congress work better. Now, why do I mention this? You may have seen news about it this week because one of our recommendations has been implemented this week. And for the first time in more than 3 decades, the new members of Congress who are going through orientation are going through a bipartisan orientation where Democrats and Republicans are learning the job together and are meeting with each other and developing relationships. This is not a joke. When I got to Congress, they literally said, okay, Democrats, you go in this room, Republicans, you go in that room. When we had to go offsite, Democrats, you get on this bus, Republicans, you get on that bus. And when we started this work on trying to make Congress work better, I talked with, it's interesting. I talked with a organizational psychologist who works at the business school at Wharton, and he put me in touch with a sports coach. And I said, "What do you do when you have broken culture?" And I said, "What do you do when you got players on the team who are trying to like torpedo the team?" He said, "Well, I cut them." And I said, "Well, we don't really have that option in Congress." And he said, "Well, how do you do orientation?" And I said, "Well, we do it entirely the wrong way." And so I told him what I just told you. We got, Democrats on this bus, Republicans on that bus. And this sports coach I talked to said, "Well, I don't know much about Congress, but it seems like you ought to stop doing that." So one of our 200 recommendations was stop doing that. And this is literally the first orientation. It's happening right now. There was a news story about it this morning. This is the first orientation in 3 decades where Democrats and Republicans are learning the job together, which I think is pretty cool. And I just share that with you because even that ethic of not having it be red shirts and blue shirts and everything is an ethic I learned growing up in PA, which is like, when we had a problem as a community, we weren't checking party registrations. We weren't, you know, trying to figure out what color t-shirt you were wearing. We just get it done. And so I really want to just end where I started, which is with gratitude to each of you for the ethic that you bring to making our community better. It has been such a terrific honor to get to represent my hometown and to get to represent Clallam County and to have such extraordinary partners, including many of you here. I see Commissioner French. Thank you for your leadership and for the work on Recompete in particular. But I am just so grateful for having had the opportunity to represent our community. I told Colleen before she started the Zoom, I'm not done. I've got a little over a month and a half left in my term, and our office every day is trying to figure out how to get some final pucks into the net for our community. So including, I saw the news story about Olympic Medical Center. We're introducing legislation trying to help rural hospitals that are, where the approach to reimbursement by the federal government is stinky, to use a legislative technical term. So I'd probably talk longer if you wanted me to. I'll stop there and maybe Colleen, before we wrap up, you'll let me just stay a minute or two in closing, but I'm happy to take whatever questions you got and hear what's on all of your minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So I received questions from Paul Gottlieb that he wasn't able to attend, and I promised him I would read his two questions.
Sure.
So one was, let's see. What have you learned about how to achieve bipartisanship after making it a hallmark of your congressional career?
The funniest thing, I'm going to share a story because I actually think it's instructive. My first term, And I'm gonna give the background on this, just in part because I think it's funny and interesting, in part because I think it's important preface. I had reached out to a buddy of mine who was going through a divorce, and I called him. I had gone to college with him, and I just said, "Hey, I wanted to check on you. You know, are you doing okay?" And he um he was doing fine, and he said, interestingly, like professionally, I'm doing better than I've ever done. And I said, "Tell me about it." And he said, "Well, my job is focused on helping lift people out of poverty." He said, I'm part of a group that's focused on helping asset poor people build assets." And I said, "Tell me about the work." And he said, "Well, we've been doing this really interesting research with an economist, and they found a few things." He said, "First of all, they found that folks who don't have a lot of assets disproportionately don't have savings accounts. And if they do, they aren't making deposits into the savings accounts. And the other thing they found was that asset poor people disproportionately gamble and play the lottery." And he said that we've been working with this economist, and the they came up with this sort of unusual idea of trying to create the excitement of gambling and playing the lottery and have it apply to saving money. And their concept they called prize linked savings accounts. And the way it would work is if you open up an account, you would earn a chance. And every time you made a deposit, you would earn a chance. And the chance was for cash prizes. Your money would never be at risk, but rather the financial institutions would be able to take part of their marketing budget, and that rather than running TV ads or online ads, they could use it to offer cash prizes. Here's what they found. It dramatically influenced savings behavior. People were far more likely to open up an account, far more likely to make deposits. The other thing they found was that it was illegal. Not for any good reasons. It's just financial regulators had never thought of anything like this. And so, without the clear ability to do it, they were unable to do it. So I'm talking to this friend of mine, and I said, "Well, it's interesting because like I just got this job in Congress and like we can make laws." And I said, "So like I'd love to talk with you more about it and think about like how we might be able to change that. Because if we can help lift people up out of poverty and make people more self-sufficient and help people make ends meet, like that seems like a pretty good idea." So we work with, this group called the Asset Building Coalition, and um, we work with the financial institutions just to make sure it'd be workable with them. But I'm a freshman in the minority who's not on the Financial Services Committee. So I'm like, I got to find a partner to work with. And, I'm looking at the roster, and I said to my team, I'm going to go talk to Tom Cotton on the floor because Tom had been a management consultant for the same firm that I'd been a management consultant for after grad school. And my team was like, "Well, Tom's a very conservative Republican. He's now, you may have heard of him. He was in the mix for a cabinet position in the Trump administration. He's very conservative." But like, I'd met him and thought, well, I'm going to go talk to him. So I go up to Tom Cotton on the floor and I said, "Tom, you worked for McKinsey and Company. I worked for McKinsey. You're a consultant." And I just totally nerd out on him. Like, here's this economist, and I go through the data, and I'm just totally nerding out. And, talk about the prize link savings and all this stuff. And I finished my pitch. And what happened next was basically the best I can describe it as just 10 seconds of Tom Cotton staring at me in silence. We just looked at me, which, by the way, if anyone's ever stared at you in silence for 10 seconds, it is either the most romantic moment of your life or the most awkward. And in this occasion with Tom Cotton, it was both. But just kidding. That was off the record too. Uh, but once he broke the 10 seconds of magic, he said to me, "So what you're saying is you want to introduce legislation that would eliminate unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep financial institutions from offering an innovative product that would make people more self-sufficient and less reliant on the government." To which I responded, "Sure." I mean, for me, it was about helping poor people save money. For him, it was about eliminating unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep people from being self-sufficient and less reliant on the government. And it was a Kilmer Cotton bill in the House. It was um, Elizabeth Warren and Senator Moran from Kansas in the Senate, passed the House, passed the Senate, signed by the president. And now there's thousands of people around the country that have these prize link savings accounts, most of whom had never had a saving account before. So I think that's kind of cool, right? And what I can tell you, so what's my takeaway from that story? Well, one is like I may disagree with Tom Cotton on 99 things, but if you can find the one thing that we can work together on, like go work on that, right? And, that has been my approach in this job where, I'll work with anybody who's willing to work with me if we can find common ground on it. The other key takeaway that I have is sometimes if you want things to work differently, you have to do things differently. I mentioned I chaired this committee in the House, and historically, these select committees do nothing. In fact, I was on a select committee on budget and appropriations process reform that passed 0 recommendations. We spent more than a year working and literally came to agreement on nothing. And I was like, well, and which was a learning experience for me. I was like, okay, if I'm going to chair this committee, I'm going to do things very differently. And so if so the first thing we did when Speaker Pelosi said, we're going to create this committee, she said, how many people do you want on it? And I said, I want 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And she said, well, you're in the majority. You can have a numbers advantage. And I said, I think if you're going to do institutional reform, it needs to be bipartisan. And I said, in fact, I want to have a supermajority requirement for making recommendations so that there's strong bipartisan support. So if the majority flips one way or the other, you want to have reform and change that's durable, that lasts. Um, when you have a committee, the first thing that happens is the committee gets its funding and you hire staff. And what usually happens is Democrats take their half of the money. They hire people with a Democratic background who put on blue jerseys, and Republicans take their half of the money and they hire people with a Republican background who put on red jerseys. And then they spend the rest of the time fighting with each other. When I took over this committee, I reached out to my Republican counterpart, a guy named Tom Graves. Tom was a very conservative Republican. In fact, so conservative when he left Congress, his district is so red, his seat is now held by Marjorie Taylor Greene. So it's a very conservative district. And Tom was a very conservative Republican. But I said, Tom, I got a crazy idea for you. What if instead of splitting the money, we just hire one team, one staff? And my commitment to you will be some of them will be Democrats and some will be Republicans. And every hiring decision we make, we'll make it together. We'll do it as a team. And rather than putting on red jerseys and blue jerseys, they'll just put on jerseys that say, hey, let's fix Congress. And to his credit, he said, my leadership is going to hate this idea, but let's do it. And so we did it. And it fundamentally changed how our committee worked. We did something that, to my knowledge, no other committee in Congress did, which is we had a bipartisan planning retreat. I don't know about you, like if you're starting, when you get assigned a task, like don't you sit or you're part of an organization, don't you sit down together and say like, hey, so what do we want to do? What does success look like? Only in Congress is this considered a novel idea, but it was a novel idea. We got all the Democrats and Republicans in the room, and we talked about what we wanted to work on together. And finally, if you watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you have too much time on your hands. But if you do watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you'd notice something. We didn't sit with Democrats on one side of the dais and Republicans on the other. We sat Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. Why? Well, when a witness says something interesting, my like genetic predisposition is to lean over to the person next to me and say, hey, that's kind of interesting. What do you think about that? In our committee, we were the only committee in Congress where when you did that, you leaned over to someone from the different party. We didn't even sit at a dais. We sat around a round table. Why? Well, I don't know about you. I have never had a good conversation speaking to the back of someone's head. And I share this with you because that was not cosmetic, right? Like that was intentional. Because if you want things to work differently, you have to do things differently. And that is why despite the fact that these select committees almost never pass anything, we passed over 200 recommendations. Now, half of them have been fully implemented, about a quarter are in the process of being implemented, and we got to get the other quarter out of the parking garage, which is again part of what I'm trying to get done in my final couple months here. So I share that with you. Hopefully that's responsive to the question, but just gives you a sense of some of my lessons learned.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we do have a question from Roy Morris in the chat. And his questions, what are some of the strategies for increasing youth engagement through community service and employment readiness and job skills?
Really super question. One of the things that, again, thankfully you've seen bipartisan support for is trying to expand youth opportunities for skills learning, for career and tech ed in particular. I think it's really a shame that for a long while you had a bunch of folks in politics who sort of dissed the trades. And, there's intention, Haley is on my team, is on the Zoom from my team. Haley can tell you, we have together visited more career and tech ed programs in Washington 6th Congressional District, then we have civics classes. And I have done that very intentionally because I think it's important to tell young people who are trying to learn a trade, stick with it because we need more people entering the trades. It's really important for people to, you know, to learn a skill, and we're hurting for workers. And a lot of our skilled trades, whether we're talking about healthcare or construction trades, we need more folks going into the trade. So some of that is making sure that elected officials um, are are get it, right? That they, not every job is going to require a, 4-year degree or a master's degree or something like that. And there are really good jobs that require skills training, and we've got to make sure that we're providing adequate funding and adequate encouragement to young people in that regard. There's other things, as we contemplate like updating the National Apprenticeship Act, which hasn't been updated for decades, that involves, encouraging employers to provide more opportunities to youth, and providing some of those, making easier the opportunity to provide some of those opportunities to young people. The only other thing that I would mention is when I worked in economic development, there was a program, I think it was a federal program, that was run through the Department of Labor, where it basically provided support for folks that do what Colleen does very ably, who work in economic development, and folks who work in workforce development, and our K-12 institutions and our business community and higher ed, including like folks like Peninsula Community College, all to be able to be at the table and say, hey, where is industry going? Right? Like if we're if we're thinking about where the timber industry is headed or maritime jobs, what do you need so that you can kind of work backwards for this is what employers need, and let's make sure that that's informing curriculum and the work that's happening in the school district and the work that's happening, the training that's being provided at our colleges. Some of that's still happening, but it's happening because the local community is putting a bunch of hustle and sweat equity into it. Um, that used to happen with some support from the federal government. And as Congress contemplates updating some of the workforce laws, I actually think that there's some value in at least providing some federal support for that type of thing.
Great. So I want to offer a personal thank you to you. I remember years ago, I had a meeting with you. I showed up late. I had the time wrong. And you met with me at a restaurant in Squim.
Yeah.
And I pitched you on the fact that, hey, this PTAC program, procurement technical assistance counselor program, doesn't work in Clallam and Jefferson counties. And I went through my litany of frustration, and you said, boy, that's a really hard hill to climb. Do you have another issue that I could work on for you? And I said, okay, yes, but you and your staff went to bat and did some research and found that over the past 10 years, only 3 businesses had been supported in Clallam County over the past 10-year period. And so recognized, okay, we're just not getting help from the program, and because of the way it was structured. And so you convinced DOD to open up a new program for different regions of the state that weren't receiving any support, and we applied for it and we received the funding, and now we have 2 employees that are real experts in helping businesses understand how to win government contracts. That's Rebecca Miller and Justine Wagner. And to date, they have helped businesses now since we started up in October of 2023. They've helped they currently have over 100 clients, and they've helped them achieve over 27 million in contracts. So that was directly from your advocacy work, your help, and to get the federal government to work for a rural community like ours. So I just am your biggest fan, and you've been such a huge help to our community. So thank you for that.
You bet. Well, and I will just say that's going to be a bigger deal in the in the months ahead. as many of you know, the United States Navy is about to spend, um, you know, likely more than $6 billion in Kitsap County. And so the amount of services and work that's going to come out of that, what is going to be a massive upgrade to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, um, is going to present a lot of opportunity. And, um, I know we all hate Russell Wilson now because he doesn't play for the Seahawks, but, Russell Wilson always said, why not us, right? Like someone's going to win the Super Bowl, why not us? And that's how I look at federal dollars, right? Like if the federal government's going to spend $6 billion at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, which is likely going to be far more than that, to be honest, why not us, right? Like why not see some of those opportunities come our way, rather than go to people from some other state, and making sure that there's local jobs, held by local people doing that work, is a really big priority for me. And kudos to you, Colleen, for doing the hard work of getting that Procurement Technical Assistance Center established for the peninsula. I will just say one other thing in that front. The federal government doesn't always get it when it comes to some of the challenges facing rural communities. I still remember when I got in, you'll remember this, Colleen. When I first got into this job, I still remember I was down in Grays Harbor and had a meeting with the community college down there, and there was um, uh, um, they had a small business development center, as did Clallam County, and they said we were just told that we have to shut it down.
Wazoo. Yeah.
Yeah, and the sort of fiduciary of the small business development centers was Washington State University. And I said, what's their argument? And they said, well, we don't get as much traffic as the small business development centers on Interstate 5, to which I responded, pardon the expression, no shit, right? Like we're not, like we're a rural community. Of course, we're not going to get as much traffic as Interstate 5, but like the work that we're doing is massively important and in fact, more important. And so I called the president of Washington State University and I said, like, don't do this, right? Like that doesn't make sense. And to his credit, he said, I'm going to fix this. Even if it comes out of my own office's budget, we will fix this. And they did. But, that is one of those examples where Washington State University I don't blame them. They were held accountable for like how many clients get seen and that type of thing. And like, if they're being held accountable without other metrics, like, they're going to see fewer clients in Aberdeen and in PA than they are in Seattle. But the work matters a lot, right? Like it matters a ton in Aberdeen and Port Angeles. So I think I'm just affirming your point, which is it's real, part of my role and part of the role of our office has been just to try to get the federal government to get it better. The same thing, by the way, with like Olympic Medical Center, right? So under the Trump administration, there was a change in reimbursement policy that cost OMC about 50 million bucks over 10 years. And it was a policy that made sense if you were only keeping in mind urban areas, but it completely hosed, sort of rural soul community hospitals like ours. And we worked on it for years. I sponsored legislation. I, bugged the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services so much that I feared that they were going to put a restraining order out against me. But we got it fixed. We got them to change the policy. And like that's, as you've all followed, OMC could use the money. So, that, and again, that's a testament to our community for making sure that your voices are heard.
So Dr. Maxwell.
Yeah, thank you. This won't be so much a question, it's just another kind of on Colleen's coattails, just an observation and expression of gratitude. It struck me that it takes a special kind of mental illness and a serious dermatologic condition that gets us really thick skin for somebody to enter civil service. I see you're not the only one on the call with this disease combination. I see Randy and Mike and Steve also have a burgeoning case developing. But it just, for someone to go into civil service, you really have to be motivated by to want to do something good. You can't, it's not all about yourself. And I just think as you put myself in your shoes, I would hope that would end with some feeling of accomplishment, that you did something. And I got to tell you that you did it in spades, Derek. I mean,
Thank you.
I think you can look, walk through your district and the community and see the tangible impact of your support, advocacy, partnership across multiple sectors that I will say not only impacts lives, but really, at least in my sector, impacted lives.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, so you're supportive. I'll speak from my perspective for healthcare in this community, through the hospital, and your support of the establishing a community health center in our community. It has literally saved lives. And so I just want to leave you with that thought that I'm thankful, and hopefully you, despite the frustrations, it was worth the effort. And I can tell you, all of us in this district are going to feel it for time to cut, for all time. Your fingerprints are here forever, even though you're leaving the office. So thank you.
Thank you.
So well
Well,
said, Mike.
I appreciate the kind words. The most important word you said was partnership from my standpoint. I mean, I look at the Zoom and it's populated more than when I first got on. And I can literally go through every square on my screen and think of people who have been terrific partners to me and to our office. And there is nothing that our office did that didn't involve partnerships including with you, Mike. And thank you for being such a terrific partner. And please thank your team for me too.
So Paul.
Thanks, Colleen. Congressman, I'm going to run up to the airport, meet with the Coast Guard on a project that they're looking at. So I got to run out of the office. I won't be here till the end, but I wanted to kind of reiterate what Dr. Maxwell just said is, a very short amount of time that I've known you and you've known me, but the consummate collaborator is probably the way that I would describe you, not only here in the community, but on the floor. And that extends to your entire team. I haven't had the privilege of meeting a team that is willing to dive into it more so than your team. And I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you do for this community. And I think the essence of what you started this conversation off with was, this community every day reminds me of why they deserve our efforts as public servants. Amen. So we continue to do that. We'll continue to lead from the front and lead by your example. So thank you for your friendship and collaboration.
Thank you. I feel the same. Thank you. Really grateful for your partnership, and you guys are doing awesome work. It's really exciting to see the progress there.
Appreciate it.
And thanks for shouting out my team too. I think I said this to Colleen, other than, the folks who are working on the ground in on the recompete effort. I'm not sure. Haley may have been more excited about our community getting the recompete award. She rivaled me for the level of excitement. She really wanted to see it happen for our community too. And I've got a great team. When people say, "What are you proudest of your time in office?" My honest response is, I'm just really proud of the team that I have. Really good people who are doing the hard work. So I feel very lucky for that.
Standing in that office for a conversation will never be the same. I'm looking at the background behind you, kind of fuzzed out there, but yeah, I think that I definitely look forward to keeping track of where everybody ends up. And thank you again.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, Congressman, I just really wanted to thank you for your efforts on the blue economy and ocean issues. I'm at PNNL SQUIM. I've only been there for 2 years, but I've been in the ocean business for 35 years in various federal roles. But the main thing is your consistent advocacy. We are seeing incredible results now for our local Marine lab. 40 million in modernization of the PNNL campus, a first-in-class hybrid vessel. Thank you for coming out for the christening with the good senator out there. Largest within DOE. And importantly, we're growing jobs around public-private partnership and marine carbon dioxide removal. These are, early stage research, but we are on the leading front foot, not just nationally, but also internationally. We are bringing this to our local community here to be, pioneers in an essence. And a lot of that was not going to happen without you and your staff in collaboration with what's going on. And these are living wage jobs. Importantly, these are jobs that we can recruit locally for. People can stay and grow and raise a family with living wage jobs. And that is something of all the things that you've seen and you can create, I hope you can be assured that that impact of a once-in-a-generation investment at PNNL will be felt for decades. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris. Well, you know, I think you guys are the best kept secret in town. Maybe less of a secret now than you were when I first got into office, but I still remember I got into this job and I was like, there's a Department of Energy research lab in Squim. And I came out to visit and I was like, this is super cool and they're doing really important work. And it was a priority for me to get on, not just to get on the appropriations committee, but to get on the energy and water subcommittee so that we could see some resources come your way, for that modernization work, and particularly around the blue economy work. And I don't know, I think it's actually both the work is super cool and the fact that we now have a Secretary of Energy who can both pronounce SQUIM and has been to the lab is pretty neat. It took us a while to get her there and I kept bugging them about it, but I think, frankly, that's part of the reason we've been able to secure as many resources as we have is Department of Energy now knows how valuable your work is and you're no longer the best kept secret for them either. So that's a testament to the whole team out there. And please thank everybody for the work they do out there. And our goal is not just to make investments for the sake of investments, it's to grow jobs, to grow opportunity in our community. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
So
You bet.
Richie, I'll get to you in just a second, but Representative Kilmer, can you talk a little bit about the Rockefeller program and your position, next position as Senior Vice President for U.S. Programs and Policy?
Yeah, my mom's really relieved that I got a job. When I announced that I was leaving Congress, my mom said, "So what are you going to do next?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "You're leaving a job without something lined up?" And I said, I kind of hope I'm employable, Mom, but holy cow, for a year, every time I called home, she was like, "What are you doing, pal?" So the priority for me was, I want to keep doing good. I feel like I look at life as a series of chapters, and 20 years of elective office felt like about right for this chapter. But when I thought about my next chapter, it was important to me to find something where I felt like I could still do some good. And so that shaped a lot of, sort of how I looked at my next thing. I'm going to be working for the Rockefeller Foundation in a new role that they've created called U.S. Programs and Policy. The Rockefeller Foundation's work has largely been in the United States around economic opportunity, including some work that they've done on place-based economic opportunity, which may create some future opportunities for partnership down the road.
Great.
They have done work on climate. So as Chris, raised the question or the statement. Sorry, that's the buzzer for the floor opening. The building is not on fire, don't worry, and it'll stop in a couple minutes or a few seconds. So they do a bunch of work on climate, and then they also do work on health and on democracy. And so, when you think about that, like the overlap between the stuff I've worked on in Congress and the priorities of the foundation are like almost a perfect overlap on the Venn diagram. So that's kind of cool for me and exciting for me. And I'll start that role in the new year. I will, as I've just said, work every day until my term is up, and then I'm giving myself a weekend off, and then starting the next day. So, not a big break in between, but excited about that opportunity and hopeful that it lets me continue to work on some of the priorities and partnerships that I've had in the past.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We look forward to working with you in your new role.
Thank you.
Richie.
Yes, hi. My name's Richie Meyer. I'm with Labor's Local 252.
Good to see you, Richie.
Congressman, I just wanted to make sure that, on behalf of 252, thank you for, the 10 or so years of partnership that we've had between you and your team. And then Local 252 itself. Chuck Moe wanted to be here today, but he's in negotiations all day today.
Okay.
But I know that when he brings up, the importance of politics in general, you and your team get mentioned quite a bit with the relationship and partnership that you guys have had over the last 10 or so years. So you know, thank you very much. You definitely led the way in terms of partnering with, you know, building trades and trades in general. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Well, I appreciate the partnership. And, you know, the good news over these last few years is that we've seen, you know, we're building stuff again in this country, right? We're making investments in modernizing our infrastructure. You know, I mentioned the work that's happening at the shipyard, and my perspective, and I know, you know, and please say hi to Chuck for me. I know your perspective as well, is that when the federal government builds projects, it shouldn't just be about, you know, sort of building a new dry dock or building a road. It's about building the middle class, and it's about building the next generation of workers. And the federal government doesn't always get that right. And, you know, my hope is, you know, as you see the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law continue to be implemented, that it continues to provide more opportunities for working families and for, you know, members of your local. And when we see the massive investment that's happening at the shipyard, you know, our conversation with the Navy has been to, you know, really make sure that there's local job opportunities that are provided, rather than seeing that work go someplace else.
Great, thanks. Someone sent a question to me to ask. Let's see, it's how do you think the changes from the election are going to most affect Clallam County and its residents, both from your replacement perspective and how the overall policy differences will affect us?
Well, I'll start with some good news, and you know, and this, Colleen, I want you to hear this. I met with the head of the Recompete program yesterday, and by the way, she started by saying that the interview that they did with the team on the north end of the peninsula she was like, that was the most impressive thing we've seen. She was like, the level of community involvement, the tremendous partnerships that were demonstrated between economic organizations, counties, cities, tribes, you know, she said it was just astounding. So she started with that good news. The first question I asked her was, is there any jeopardy in terms of the funding? And she said no. She said, we're going to make sure that all of the funding is obligated to the 6 implementation award recipients. So I want you to hear that, because I asked for the meeting with them, because I wanted to make sure that they knew it was a priority to not see those dollars put in jeopardy. You know, listen, there's a new administration coming in. They've got, you know, different priorities than the Biden administration has had. You know, I think that if I had to look in my crystal ball, there are 2 things that are the big kind of question marks, right? One is what happens to defense and non-defense discretionary funding. You know, in an environment where they decide where the new administration and the next Congress decides to dramatically ratchet down funding for defense and non-defense discretionary spending, that, you know, that has implications for like that naval shipyard work that I just mentioned. If they decide to tighten the belt there, you know, if you know, in the past they have proposed, you know, when in the first Trump term, you know, they proposed some pretty substantial reductions to Department of Energy, like that. You know, we were just talking with Chris about the Department of Energy lab out in Sequim. You saw, you know, proposed reductions to funding for things like the Park Service and the Forest Service and things like that, which obviously has implications for Clallam County. Now, you know, you need to have the president, you know, the old saying is the president proposes and the Congress disposes, right? So the question is, what does Congress do with some of those proposals, and how dramatic will that change be? That, I think, is a question mark. So, you know, if I were crystal balling, you know, that is something that I think those are variables that we need to account for in Clallam County in terms of, okay, so if we see some reductions in discretionary spending on things like the Forest Service, Park Service, like how do we manage that? And the shipyard thing is a really big deal, and we need to see that project move forward. And, you know, that could be, we'll see. I can't presuppose how the new administration will handle that. On the healthcare front, you know, they have said that they want to ditch the Affordable Care Act. they said that last term as well. So, and they didn't do that successfully. But that also, that has pretty substantial implications for healthcare. We have a large population in Clallam County of folks on Medicare, folks on Medicaid. And, prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, we had a very large uninsured population. And you don't want to see, an increase in the number of people who are no pay, right? Because that has real challenges for Mike's organization and for OMC. If there's changes in reimbursement policy, that can be, that hasn't historically gone our way. And I don't want to, again, presuppose those outcomes, but that makes me a little bit anxious. And then the final thing that, in terms of big things in the year ahead is there will be the, Super Bowl of tax policy with the tax policies from the first Trump term expire next year. And so there will be big decision making around what sort of tax policies get continued and what sort of tax policies end, and whether new things get put on the table. And, I think that will be different than if, I think the outcome will be far different than if the electoral outcome had been different. But again, I can't fully presuppose what that outcome will be. I know that the benefits of the initial Trump tax package were, involved a very substantial reduction in the corporate rate and some very substantial reductions for the highest income brackets. Like, we don't have a lot of the folks with the highest income brackets living in the 6th congressional district, maybe on Bainbridge, but that's so that clearly will have some implications. But we'll see how all that plays out. That'll be a challenge for my successor. And she's here for orientation, Emily Randall. I'm hoping that she will get an opportunity to meet all you and consider you the terrific partners that I've been able to consider you. And my only ask of you, in addition to me just being here to say thank you, my only request of you is that you be the terrific partners to her and her team as you've been to me.
Great. So Representative Kilmer, will you have to move for your new job, or will you be doing remote work primarily?
I have to move.
Wow. So where will that be?
Yeah, their headquarters is in New York, but they have an office in DC, and they want me to work out of their DC office. So I'll be working there.
Very good.
Though I still have, family in Washington State. So I intend to darken all of your doorsteps on occasion. So.
All right. So your girls are almost college age, but
One's in college.
How do they feel about it? Okay.
Yeah. Amazingly, I saw Cindy Kelly. I think her mind exploded when I said I have a kid in college, because they were 3 and 6 when I started in this job. Just a funny story. When I first got sworn in, because they're doing the swearing in the early January, and I brought my 3 and 6-year-old with me for swearing in. My 3-year-old lasted like 2 minutes before she was like, I got to get out of here. And so, went upstairs and sat with her mom, and like they have like a parent's room for screaming children. And, but my 6-year-old sat with me through the entire thing. I think the American people this last year got a sense of what happens on orientation day. Usually what happens is you vote for the speaker. That usually only takes 1 round, which when I was sworn in, it only took 1 round. But it's long, right? Because you have to call everybody's name out, and they have to say like, the name of the person they're voting for. And then then after that, you get to stand up and you raise your hand and swear an oath to protect the Constitution. So we did that, and Sophie sat next to me. And when it was all over, after what was probably a couple hours of sitting on the House floor, she looked at me and she said, so why was that supposed to be special? And which was a great way to just, make sure I had adequate perspective heading into the job. And I will tell you, I got to bring her down to DC a few weeks ago, and I got to bring her back onto the House floor. And I reminded her of that story. And I said, I hope that now that this is coming to an end, you feel like this was special, and that the opportunity to serve our community was special. And she said, I did that. So not too shabby. So
That's great. So there's a question from Amanda. She says, what's the best nonpartisan way to market great ideas like prize-linked savings accounts? Why do folks think of cryptocurrency as more exciting right now? Kind of a two-part question there.
Yeah, I don't know on the second one, honestly. I don't have a really good answer to that. Although I think there's a lot of folks who work in that industry who are putting a lot of resources into trying to evangelize crypto. So that might be part of the answer. On the first idea, you know, I mean, maybe this is since I got to wrap up in a couple minutes, maybe I'll answer this and turn this into a closing comment if that's okay,
Mhm.
Colleen. So
Absolutely.
here's the cool thing, you know, like one of my favorite things is just recognizing that we have agency, right? President Kennedy said in a democracy, we all hold office as citizens. And I cannot tell you between 8 years in the state legislature and 12 years in Congress, how much of the legislation that we have introduced has just come from talking to folks I represent who say, hey, this is kind of a cool idea. Or like, have you thought about this? Or like when we've done casework and we've said like, oh, wow, like this is like, we've had enough people come to us with the same problem. This is a systemic problem. So like this might actually require fixing something legislatively. And so I guess my response to you, Amanda, would be like, don't forget, like, you know, sometimes the best way to share a good idea is just to reach out to your local electeds. And you have some like awesome ones, right? Like your county commissioners. I see Mike on, I saw Randy's name on, you know, Steve Theringer has been an incredible partner at the state level. And I know for a fact that when people come to Steve and say like, hey, I got this project or I have this cool idea, like he runs with it. And so, you know, I guess like the main thing I would tell you is recognize that you know you have agency, and that's I think where I want to end is just to say, you know, after 20 years of public service and 12 in Congress, like I actually leave with hope, you know, and not in a sort of Pollyannish way, not in a Kevin Bacon at the end of Animal House saying, you know, everything's fine, but truly hope. And you know, I used to call myself a genetic optimist. You know, Mike said I must have had some strange illness to go into this job, but you know, I used to say like I'm in this role because I'm a genetic optimist. And then someone gave me a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and it's made me stop calling myself an optimist. And the quote was that there's a difference between optimism and hope. He said, optimism is a passive virtue. It is the belief that things will get better. And he said, hope is an active virtue. It's the belief that together we can make things better. He said, it doesn't take courage to have optimism, but it does take courage to hope. And I really like that, right? Because it appreciates that we have a sense of agency. And I also like that it uses the word together, which is how we roll in Clallam County. Like we do stuff and we do big stuff together. So I just want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for being my partner to each of you. And Colleen, thank you to you and the EDC for the extraordinary work that you do. And you know, I'm in this job for a little south of a couple more months, and even when I'm out of this job, I hope you guys continue to consider me a partner and just a kid from Port Angeles who wants to help however I can. So thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks,
We
everybody.
have been blessed to have your leadership and representation. And I see Haley crying.
I appreciate you, everybody. All
We
right.
really appreciate you. You're
right.
going to be
Take care.
sorely missed. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.